His most famous work of art is, of course, the Christus Statue. And it is the most well-known statue that is done in marble of the resurrected Christ. Hi, this is Anita with 5 Minutes with Art. Today I want to talk about one of my favorite artists, which was the sculptor Bertel Thorvaldsen. He is the sculptor who produced the famous Christus statue, which you can now see throughout the world. There's some interesting facts about Thorvaldsen that a lot of people may not know. He was born in Copenhagen, but he was born in very humble circumstances. His father was from Iceland, but his father was a wood carver that would carve a lot of those large statues that could be seen on the ships of the day. So he learned, of course, a lot of the carving and other skills he would have learned from his father. His mother was a peasant girl. So he grew up in very, very humble circumstances. He was known to be extremely talented. And so when he was 11 years old, he was admitted to the Royal Danish Academy of Art. And while he was there, he was able to rise up and to continue to become, a better and better artist and be able to go to, better programs. And then he was able to go to Copenhagen. He was born in 1770 and he died in 1844. So, he considers the day he went to Rome to be considered his Roman birthday, which is in August in 1796. And he kind of said, that's his Roman birthday. That's kind of like when his life changed. That's when he, sort of more or less found himself. While he was there, he became mentored by several different artists. And he studied under many different artists. And he created many different sculptures that can be found, today throughout Europe. Some of them were very important, sculptures that were, for the Pope's tomb and other things. So you can find many of his sculptures in cities around Europe today. He's kind of an interesting character in that, he keeps falling in love time and time again. He was never married, but does have 2 children. He was sort of a little bit of an interesting sort of artistic character, too, for his time. His most famous work of art is, of course, the Christus Statue. And it is the most well-known statue that is done in marble of the resurrected Christ. So this is actually one of the most famous statues of Christ in the world. What's interesting about this Christus statue is during the time that many of the statues of Christ would have Christ with his hands stretched out, but like he was hanging on the cross. But Thorvaldsen's statue from Christ, his hands are open and they're down. And it's almost like Christ is ready to take you and to scoop you up and to put you into his arms. And the meaning for that, and the reason why he did that, is that the meaning was that Christ is there for us at all times. He will scoop us up and put us in his arms. That was kind of the meaning that he wanted to give to the statue. He wanted to give the statue the meaning about Christ's life, not necessarily about his death. In an American textbook in 1896, it says that the statue is considered the perfect statue of Christ in the world. That this, from the beginning was considered one of the most perfect statues of Christ ever to be made. It was such a unique and beautiful statue for its time. The original statue is in the Church of Our Lady in Copenhagen. And this is a very old church, an important church, which is in downtown Copenhagen. It's where, the Danish royal family will get married. But, and this is where all the royal Danish family will hold their events. This is how important this church is in Copenhagen. He lived in Rome for a long time, and he returned to Denmark in 1838. And when he returned, he became a national hero. And in fact, there were artists that painted about his return and about him coming back to Denmark. He sort of left this poor pauper that almost didn't make it in Rome because he couldn't earn money and he didn't have money. And yet he came back to Denmark as this national hero. He came back as a very important artist. And so here are some facts about him, that there was a museum today that is called the Thorvaldsen Museum, which was built in his honor. It was the first museum to ever be built in Denmark. And so you can, today you can go and you can see this museum. And you can also see many of his works in other museums around the world. The Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, museums in Russia, and museums in Berlin, Germany. You can see many of his statues in areas of Europe, in cities throughout Europe. You can see many copies of the Christus statue, and in particular, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has many copies in many of their visitor centers around the world. And there's also some copies at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. There's some in Glendale, California, Germany, Norway, the Czech Republic, Seattle, Washington, and Houston, Texas. So as you can see, there's been many copies of the statue which has been made throughout the world because it is considered to be such an important statue. One last fact about him is that Thorvaldsen and Hans Christian Andersen were considered to be friends. When he died on the 24th of March in 1844, he said, "Now I can die whenever it is time," because his tomb had been finished. And so his tomb had finally been finished, and he felt like now he was able to die. If you'd like to learn more about him, we have a blog that you can read, which is called 25 Facts About the Christus Statue Artist Bertel Thorvaldsen, which has a lot more information about his life. We'll put a link below in our podcast. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We truly do appreciate you. Consider to subscribe. We'd love to have you be part of our community.